You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 3, Kidnapping, by R.A. Consul.
Chapter 25. Rats. Explaining how to burgle the palace presented many challenges. The first was managing the disappointment. Ein seemed to expect some acrobatic feats to scale the outer walls and evade the many defenses, which she insisted were impenetrable. Kuro wasted ages explaining how successful theft relies more on patience and opportunity than stealth and agility. The next issue was trying to actually provide directions. Kuro knew the route intimately, but it was hard to relay any of it as he knew it only in the dark, and take 12 paces towards the sound of the small drain spout didn't help much if they couldn't replicate 12 of Kuro's paces or distinguish the sound of the small drain spout from the large. Nor could he tell them to just follow the wind if they got lost, as she didn't hang about with others the way she did with him. The result of the ensuing debate was that Kuro found himself leading a knight into the lower city sewers. Nobody else was coming along. They would stay behind and avoid any potentially treasonous crimes, while the professionals, the knight and the thief, did what they were best at. They had been sent with strict instructions, however. Miss Crawley had ordered him not to endanger himself. "In and out, that's it," she told him in no uncertain terms. "Leave the heroics to the knight." This demand was immediately countered by Charlie, who told him, "You bring her back safe, okay?" "What's your plan?" asked Marie's mother, who had barely and begrudgingly agreed to being left behind. "I will confront Albenactus," said Ein. "He's a reasonable man and deserves a chance to explain himself. It's entirely possible that he's no ill intentions at all. If all you say is true, Marie is the rightful queen, and Albenactus may be as much a victim in whatever Roche's plans are as she is. And if he isn't reasonable, if she is in danger," asked Marie's mother. "She's my best friend's daughter," said Ein, "and my queen. I will do the same as if either of my children were threatened." A look of grim understanding passed between the two, which spoke of a tenacious ferocity that promised to lay waste to kingdoms. It wasn't something Kuro could fully understand, but he felt it explaining some of why his friends seemed to feel so safe in their homes. He led the knight to the lower city of New Camelot, through the narrow alleys to an unattended entrance to a sewer. In his bag were the critical provisions for the journey: rope, an umbrella, a seashell full of memories, one small artificial raccoon, and several jars of some of the finest peanut butter in the realm, taken from the larder in the tea shop. Lady Ein insisted on walking through the sewers herself rather than riding in the bag. He couldn't understand why she would want that. He understood even less why she would want to illuminate their path. Once in the sewers, the knight had wasted no time in drawing her blade and setting it aglow to use as a well-sharpened torch. Regret was instantaneous. The true horror of the sewers beneath New Camelot could only be appreciated fully in the light, which is one of the reasons Kuro had always navigated by the very dim light of the luminous slime mold. The sewers were created shortly after the founding of the city and then promptly ignored. Magic ensured they kept functioning and expanding with the city, but did nothing for the ambiance. Crumbling stonework intermingled with disintegrating mortar and rusting iron. Through every crack seeped ooze of all the worst parts of the rainbow. An endless aromatic flotilla of effluent of human digestion paraded past them down the central channel. Slithering, squirming, and skittering across every surface was a collection of the mostly tiny creatures who considered such an environment to be a luxurious buffet. Seeing this, in all its unvarnished glory, the brave and stalwart knight faltered. Against an army of wyverns, she could charge forward without hesitation. Confronted with the simple reality of an untended sewer, though, that well-fed knight became suddenly and vigorously less so. Perhaps the only thing that kept her moving forward was a vain effort to save face in front of a teenage criminal who was unmoved by the revolting surroundings. "This way," said Kuro, "and try not to upset any rats." He led them as fast as he dared through the maze of tunnels. Years had passed, but the paths were still written into his bones. The lefts and rights, ups and downs, overs and unders, a song he could sing along to. His fingers found handholds that were safe for climbing without looking. The splashes and gurgles called to him, welcoming him back. "It's hard to believe they's run all the way to the palace," said Ein. "They go everywhere," said Kuro. "They connect to the sewers in Bytown if you know the paths. Everything that's left unattended too long eventually makes its way to Detritus. That includes old sewers." "How can you find your way in here?" asked Ein. They reached a 7-way junction around a swirling pool of sludge. "The wind helps," said Kuro. He picked the second tunnel from the left with confidence. "But mostly it's practice. I spent a lot of time down here exploring. Any night I didn't have something specific to steal, I'd be sent down to the sewers to find paths to useful places. It's also a good place to hide from the hounds. They have trouble tracking scent down here." The knight gagged at the mere notion of sniffing the ground. In an attempt to find something positive in her current situation, she commented, "You can walk from Detritus Lane to New Camelot and back in one night. It's incredible that it's faster to walk through the sewers than to drive. We should build a subway down here." "That wouldn't work," said Kuro. "If the paths become too well traveled, then they aren't lost anymore, so they stop connecting to the lane. It's a real pain when that happens while you're at the wrong end of one. It took me 3 days to get back once." A chorus of squeaks echoing through the tunnels halted their advance. Kuro forced an about face and took them down an alternate route. "Did we take a wrong turn?" asked Ein. Kuro shook his head and hushed her. "Too many rats," he whispered. The knight gripped her sword more tightly, as if it would be a useful defense. "How many is too many?" "About knee-deep," Kuro replied. "Unless Stephen is around, then there might be a lot." "Who is Stephen?" "He's the Rat King," said Kuro. "He's sort of in charge down here. I'd prefer to avoid him if possible. It would slow us down, and he might not like you." Ein scoffed. "I'm sure we can handle a king of rats if we need to." She spoke with the confidence of a wizard who could go toe-to-toe with Jotun. Kuro just shook his head. He was also sure she could defeat Stephen, but not certain if she could deal with the consequences. Without the king to hold back the tide, how would they manage the swarm? That's why Kuro was there, he supposed, to make sure they wouldn't have to. A single ear-piercing shriek split the quiet of the sewers. Kuro spun to find Ein reeling on one leg, trying not to tumble into the sewage while the rat she'd stepped on shot away, squealing in pain. "This way!" urged Kuro. "Faster!" His follower questioned what there was to be afraid of, but did not argue with the pace until the combination of heavy breathing and the miasma of the sewer made her stumble and choke. Then, in the momentary pause, they could hear what they were escaping from. It was like a wave of sneakers crashing towards them, the soft sides rubbing against the walls, the little hard aglets clicking together, and the rubber soles squeaking against each other. The knight donned her armor. The enchanted metal poured over her, and she charged her blade with lightning. She might as well have been preparing to do battle with an avalanche. Kuro threw himself between her and the oncoming wall of rodents. He thrust his hand into his satchel and withdrew the only weapon he knew that could contest the swarm. He held aloft a jar of peanut butter. Removing the lid, he encouraged the wind to waft the aroma towards the swarm. The teeming horde slowed and quieted, leaving a single cough-like hiss still calling out through the sewers. "Stephen! Stephen!" The Rat King emerged from the pile, as big as a bear, covered in scars, with chipped and yellowed incisors as long as Kuro's forearm. "Stephen?" The huge beast coughed out again, though this time ending with a squeak as though asking a question. Kuro took a fingerful of the aromatic paste and smeared it on the ground in front of him, allowing some rats to approach in safety to appraise the offering. "What are you doing?" Lady Ein said between clenched teeth. It was less a question and more a confused instruction to get out of the way. As she'd already made the mistake of breaking the silence, Kuro hissed a response. "I'm dealing with it. Could you please douse your sword and be quiet? You're upsetting them." While her helmet blocked her face entirely, he could still feel the outrage in her glare and her unspoken, "How dare a filthy child thief scold an honorable knight for bothering a rat?" Nonetheless, she was obviously not so offended that she was willing to prove her station by diving into the endless rodents before her, at least for now. She stepped back, and the energies engulfing her sword dimmed but were by no means extinguished. Ein's limited patience was enough, at least, for the Rat King's courtiers to squeak out their approval of the offering. "Steven! Steven!" the king demanded, and Kuro complied. He reverently placed the jar of peanut butter on the ground and backed away, giving space for the gigantic rodent to advance in comfort and investigate for himself. He sniffed and probed the jar with his enormous muzzle, then reached in with his oddly undersized paw and sampled some. "Stiffen," he said. Kuro let out a long breath he'd been holding as the Rat King took the jar and shuffled away, taking most of his army with him. "So that's Steven," said Ein. "Fascinating. Can we proceed?" "Yeah," said Kuro. "This way, and try to watch where you step this time." Ein retracted her armor and began moving with comedic caution, each step placed delicately, allowing time for even the centipedes to scurry out of the way. "Is there anything else we should be worried about down here?" she asked. "Not at this time of year," assured Kuro, though his companion seemed to take little comfort in that. The final minutes of their journey had Ein tensing at every splash or rattle. She greatly misjudged a sound of rushing water overhead, readying her blade and failing to notice Kuro readying his umbrella. The sound like rushing water quickly proved to be exactly what it claimed. Swords and armor, lightning and fire, all proved useless against the terrible assault inflicted by the runoff from a downpour somewhere in the Eastern Kingdom. A silty torrent poured over Ein, dousing her sword and filthying the perfect gleam of her armor. Kuro was starting to wonder if he wouldn't have been better off with Arthur or Charlie. Being fully capable of cleaning and drying herself did not stop her from muttering complaints about the cold, wet indignity she had suffered. Reaching the palace was a relief for both of them. Kuro presented the final tunnel connecting the sewers to the palace like a royal coachman, bowing and waving his follower onward. She did not, however, move onward. She peered into the stone spillway that served as a bridge into the palace, and it quickly became apparent that Kuro had overlooked a critical detail. The knight didn't fit. Given the years since he'd last been through, Kuro would barely fit. "I could take you in my bag," he said. Perhaps trying to avoid further indignity, Lady Ein argued, "I don't like the idea of bringing you into the palace. It could be dangerous in there." "It's fine," said Kuro. "I'll just dump you and go." "Not sure how you plan on getting through this hole, though," said Ein, still looking down the tunnel. "They've put in bars, cold steel from the look of it, with a whole encyclopedia of runes on them." "That's not new," said Kuro. "I cut through them years ago. I just put the bars back after so nobody would notice it was broken." "You carved through enchanted iron?" said Ein incredulously. "With what?" "Nail files," said Kuro. "It took a while, but the enchantments didn't do much. I think there was a building error. That's right at the palace threshold where there's salt bricks to keep fairy folk out." The weeks of work and years of expertise needed to create those enchantments had been entirely wasted. 2 feet in either direction, and it would have probably worked as intended. But the 2 security measures stacked on top of each other had made one all but useless. Reluctantly, the knight climbed into his bag. "I still can't believe Talon gave this to you," she muttered as she explored the space. "There's a filing cabinet in here. What do you need with a filing cabinet? Are these lockpicks?" Kuro tried to ignore the self-guided tour happening in his satchel and focused his attention instead on breaking into the palace. He slid the impenetrable enchanted gate up out of the little holes he dug to keep it upright, and carefully replaced it behind him. A small moment of regret washed over him, knowing this would be the last time he would come this way. Knights knew about this entrance now. Soon it would be sealed up. It might even be worse than that. He might be further shackled. He'd shown that Avalon could no longer contain him, and that palaces couldn't keep him out. He'd committed crimes that could threaten royalty. It would be hard for that to be swept under a rug. There was a good possibility he'd be back in Niflheim by the end of the week. The tunnel bent upwards, and Kuro had to climb, pressing himself against the side and shimmying up an inch at a time. He considered that it might be time to disappear. Marie would be rescued by the knights and her mother. He'd done all he could for his friend, and she wouldn't want him imprisoned for his efforts. Maybe Ms. Crawley would want to come with him. She was an escaped prisoner now. Just because the warden was a villain didn't mean her sentence would be reduced. Might even be extended since she'd escaped. He waited at the top of the pipe to listen. The corridor above was silent, so he pushed the drain cover up and away and hauled himself out into the dusty stone floor. As his passenger gracelessly clambered out of his bag, he thought of places he might be able to live in hiding. Maybe it was time to move to the Blandlands. It was harder living rough out there, but also harder for the hounds to find him if they came looking. He turned to climb back from the castle into the sewers, but his exit was interrupted.
Kuro, said Ein, we're in the labyrinth.
Yeah? Said Kuro, trying to imagine where else she expected a neglected drain to be but in the lowest parts of the palace. Is that a problem?
It's an enchanted maze built to befuddle anyone who enters it who is not of royal lineage, explained Ein.
Yeah, but you're a knight, said Kuro. Don't you know your way around?
Not from here, she replied. I don't even know where here is.
It made sense in hindsight that the knights would only know the paths that were actually useful. For the labyrinth to be effective, there would be countless dead ends that served no purpose but to get lost in. Kuro rolled his eyes at the useless genius of wizards. They put so much effort into showing off their incredible skill and power that they ended up defeating themselves. Where do you want to go? He asked, slinging his bag over his shoulder and resigning himself to being a guide for a little while longer.
The throne room.
The kitchens are the closest exit to that, replied Kuro. He waited for the breeze to gather, showing him the path through the movement of dust on the floor. This way, he said. The knight appeared both more confident and more apprehensive in her home environment. She was prepared for battle with forces she understood, but that might include her fellow knight. Her tension grew as the wind led them through the labyrinth.
This is where I leave you, Kuro,
said Ein as she began to ascend a steep, narrow set of stairs leading to a hidden nook in the palace kitchens.
Do you think you can get back to Ms. Crawley and the others safely?
No problem, he said. He expected to be in far less danger than she, and it would do Marie no good to have her rescuer worrying over him as well. Good luck. As she disappeared up the stairs, Kuro felt suddenly helpless. He couldn't imagine a way his presence could be useful, but now that the moment had come, turning tail and running to the Blandlands felt like abandoning his friend. The west wind tousled his hair comfortingly before starting to guide him home. She was right, he thought. Marie would have told him to leave as well, to trust things to the adults. Him interfering would only make things worse. As he turned to leave, he noticed an unexpected object in his path. A spool of thread, detritus gray, like damp concrete on a cloudy day. Sitting on end as if carefully placed there, in the middle of the floor, at an intersection between crossing hallways, barely visible from the light filtering down the stairs from the kitchen. It was so out of place that he just stood there staring at it. Even the wind settled, uncertain what such a thing could mean. In the silence that followed, he could hear the voices of knights raised in anger, bouncing through the palace above.
"Rita!"
was the only word he could make out clearly, and that was because it was Sir Bors shouting it. The breeze swirled around him, as if to ask what he wanted to do. Maybe he was right, and there was nothing he could do to help. Maybe he was condemning himself to a one-way trip to Niflheim if he stayed. But he was conflicted, and when he was uncertain, he did the opposite of what Phineas Hearn would do. He turned and mounted the stairs to the kitchen.
Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.